My fiancée said I was too emotionally broken to marry, so I walked away silently. And she showed up at my door years later, begging. I'm a 31-year-old guy, and I used to believe love could fix everything, even the parts of me I didn't understand. For most of my life, I carried a quiet heaviness. I grew up in a house where silence was safer than honesty. My parents weren't cruel, just emotionally absent. My dad buried himself in work, and my mom lived in her own world of disappointments. I learned early that vulnerability made people uncomfortable. So I became the guy who smiled through pain, joked through rejection, and apologized for existing. By the time I hit my 20s, I had mastered the art of pretending I was fine. In relationships, I overcompensated, buying gifts, saying sorry for things I didn't do, trying to prove I was enough. But no matter what I did, people always left. So when I met Rachel, she felt like oxygen in a room I'd been suffocating in for years. She had this warmth that disarmed me instantly. The kind of person who looked at you and made you believe she saw something deeper. She'd listen when I talked about my family, trace her fingers along the scars on my wrist from when I was younger, and whisper, "You didn't deserve what they did to you." For the first time, someone wasn't afraid of my broken parts. They wanted to understand them. I started to think maybe love really could heal. Maybe all those years of holding everything in were leading to this. Someone who'd stand beside me instead of walking away. When she said, "I want to help you heal," I believed her with every fiber of my being. Looking back now, I should have realized that not everyone who says they want to heal you actually knows what it means to stay. But at the time, I thought I'd finally found someone who loved all of me, scars and all, and for a while, I truly believed that was enough. The first year with Rachel felt like something out of a movie. I remember Sunday mornings when we'd wake up tangled in sheets, sunlight pouring through the curtains, and she'd whisper, "Promise me we'll never lose this." I'd nod, believing her, believing us. We talked about everything, marriage, kids, where we'd live. She said she wanted a small ceremony in the woods, surrounded by friends and laughter. I wanted whatever she wanted. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving, I was building. When I proposed, it wasn't extravagant. Just the two of us, a quiet evening on the balcony of our apartment, a cheap bottle of champagne, and her laughing through tears as she said yes. The world felt still in that moment, like it was finally giving me permission to be happy. We started planning the wedding right away. She pinned dresses, I researched venues. I even started premarital counseling because I wanted to make sure I'd be the husband she deserved. But slowly, something in her started to shift. At first, it was small comments, little things that seemed harmless. "Maybe don't bring up your parents when we meet my family," she'd say with a tight smile. Or, "You don't have to be so serious all the time, babe, just be happier." I'd laugh it off, thinking she just wanted us to blend in, to be normal. But the more I tried to adjust, the more she pulled away. She stopped asking about my therapy sessions, stopped holding my hand when I opened up about bad memories. It was like she wanted the idea of healing, not the reality of it. I told myself every relationship has growing pains. That love meant patience, compromise, and faith. But deep down, a quiet fear began to whisper. What if she only loved me when I was pretending to be okay? And I couldn't shake the feeling that the version of me she wanted didn't actually exist. It was subtle at first, the way Rachel's patience started to fade. The woman who once told me she loved my honesty began to roll her eyes whenever I tried to talk about how I was feeling. One night, after I had a nightmare about my childhood, I reached for her hand, still trembling. She pulled away and said, "You can't keep letting the past control you, okay?" It's exhausting. That word, exhausting, hit harder than she realized. I remember sitting on the edge of the bed, my chest tightening as she turned her back to me. I wanted to argue, to tell her that healing isn't a switch you can just flip. But instead, I whispered, "I'm sorry," because that's what I always did when people started to leave. Days passed like that. Small silences, cold shoulders, the warmth between us replaced by polite distance. She began spending more time at work or with friends. I'd stay home, pretending to be fine, cleaning the apartment, making dinner she'd barely touch. When she'd finally come home, she'd sigh and mutter, I just wish you'd be more positive." I started suppressing everything again, locking my emotions behind a fake smile just to keep her close. But that only made me feel more hollow. The harder I tried to be what she wanted, the less she seemed to want me. One night, after another one of her quiet, detached dinners, I asked, "Do you even want to be with me anymore?" She stared at me for a long time, then said, "I love you, but it's like you're broken and I don't know how to fix you." She left the table, and I just sat there staring at her untouched plate, the candle between us flickering like it was struggling to breathe. That night, I realized something terrifying. She didn't want to understand my pain. She just wanted it to disappear, and no matter how much I loved her, I could feel her slowly falling out of love with the real me. It happened on a Thursday night, one of those evenings that start ordinary but end up carving themselves into your memory forever. We were sitting on the couch, surrounded by half-finished wedding invitations. I had been trying to make her laugh, showing her a cringy photo of me as a kid wearing oversized glasses. She smiled faintly, then sighed, and something in that sigh felt final. "Can we talk?" she said softly, but her tone carried the kind of weight that makes your stomach drop before you even know why. She took a deep breath, eyes darting between the invitations and me. "I can't marry you," she whispered. The words didn't even register at first. I thought she was joking, some weird attempt at stress relief. But when she didn't smile, everything inside me froze. "What?" I asked, my voice barely audible. She stared at the floor. You're too emotionally broken. I can't spend my life trying to fix someone who refuses to move on." My heart felt like it stopped mid-beat. I wanted to scream, to tell her how hard I'd been trying, how much I'd changed. But instead, I just sat there listening as she continued, each word slicing deeper. "You're a good man, but being with you feels like drowning. I love you, but it's not enough." She grabbed her overnight bag, the one I didn't even realize she'd packed earlier, and stood by the door. For a moment, she looked back, eyes red but resolute. "I need space. Maybe one day when you're better," but she didn't finish that sentence. She just left. The door clicked shut, and the silence that followed was deafening. The ring box on the table felt like a cruel joke, a symbol of everything I thought was real. I sat there until the sun came up, staring at those stupid invitations, knowing deep down that the future I'd been building had just collapsed in one quiet, heartbreaking sentence. And for the first time in years, I didn't cry. I just went numb. The days after Rachel left felt like living underwater, everything muffled, heavy, unreal. I'd wake up and forget for a second that she was gone, then see her toothbrush still by the sink and feel that sharp, nauseating reminder all over again. Friends reached out offering advice that felt hollow. "You just need time. She'll come back. Focus on yourself." But I didn't want comfort. I wanted silence. I didn't text her. I didn't call, not once. Part of me hoped she'd reach out first, but the other part, the exhausted, broken part, knew that if she did, it would only reopen wounds that needed to finally bleed clean. So I packed her things carefully, the scarf she loved, her favorite mug, even the little Polaroids she insisted on keeping on the fridge. I boxed them up and left them by the door. Then I did something that felt like both closure and surrender. I mailed her engagement ring back. No note, no explanation, just the ring in a small envelope. But a few hours later, guilt gnawed at me, so I wrote a short letter. 4 words. "You were right. I need to heal, but not for you." After that, I stopped checking my phone. I deleted our photos. I even removed her playlist from my car. For weeks, my apartment was silent, except for the hum of the fridge and the creak of the floorboards when I'd pace at night. And yet, beneath the grief, there was something else, something small but powerful. It was relief. For once, I wasn't performing. I wasn't begging someone to stay. I was just existing. It felt strange, terrifying even, but it was real. That night, I looked at my reflection in the dark window and whispered, "Maybe this is where I start over." But deep down, I had no idea how hard the rebuilding would actually be. The weeks turned into months, and slowly I started to rebuild myself. Not for Rachel, not to prove anything, but because I couldn't live as that broken version of me anymore. I began therapy again, this time with a determination I'd never had before. My therapist, an older woman with kind eyes and a voice that felt like calm water, once told me, "You confuse love with rescue. You've been trying to earn the kind of safety you never got as a child." Those words stuck with me like a mirror I couldn't look away from. Healing wasn't pretty. It was ugly, raw, and painfully slow. Some nights, I'd wake up drenched in sweat, hearing her words, too emotionally broken, echoing in my head. Other nights, I'd find myself scrolling through our old texts, feeling that familiar ache creep back in. But bit by bit, the pain began to change shape. It didn't vanish. It just became quieter, manageable. I poured myself into work, building something from the same chaos that once defined me. That's how my small mental health app began. An idea born from wanting to help people who felt the way I did, unseen, unworthy, unfinished. It started as a side project, but somehow helping others find language for their pain helped me find my own. There were days I felt proud again. Days I caught myself laughing with friends without faking it. Days when silence no longer felt like loneliness. It felt like peace. And one morning, as I stood in front of the mirror, buttoning a clean shirt before a big investor meeting, I caught a glimpse of something I hadn't seen in years: self-respect. Not the kind that needs approval, but the kind that quietly says, "I survived." For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel broken, just human. But the universe has a strange way of testing your healing, right when you start believing you're finally okay. 3 years had passed since Rachel walked out of my life. I'd stopped waiting for closure, stopped wondering where she was or who she was with. My app, ironically called Second Step, had taken off. What started as a late-night coping project became a growing community. People shared their stories, found hope, found each other. For the first time, my pain had purpose. One morning, I got invited to speak on a podcast about emotional recovery. I almost said no. Talking publicly about my past felt like opening an old wound. But something inside me whispered, "You've spent your whole life hiding. Maybe it's time to speak." So I did. I talked about trauma, love, and what it means to rebuild after losing everything. I mentioned how sometimes the people who say they'll save you are the ones who teach you to save yourself. The host asked, "Me, if you could tell your younger self anything, what would it be?" I paused and said, "That being loved doesn't mean being fixed. It means being accepted, even when you're still learning how to stand." The episode went viral. Messages flooded in, people thanking me, sharing their own heartbreaks, telling me my words made them feel less alone. It was overwhelming, humbling, surreal. But then came the twist. A few days later, my producer forwarded me a message from a listener. The email read, "Your guest's story sounded too familiar. Please tell him thank you for teaching me how to see what I destroyed." The name at the bottom made my chest tighten. Rachel. After all those years, she had heard me again. But this time through a screen, through the voice of a man she once said was too broken to love. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger, just a strange, quiet calm. It started with a single message. "Hey, I'm so proud of who you've become. Can we talk?" Rachel. I stared at the screen for a long time, my pulse hammering in my throat. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let the past stay buried. But another part, the one that still wondered why, needed to know what she could possibly want after all this time. So I replied, "Sure, one coffee." We met at the same cafe where we used to go every Sunday. When she walked in, it felt like déjà vu mixed with a faint ache. She looked older, not in a bad way, but like someone who'd lived through storms. Her once perfect composure was gone. She smiled nervously, clutching her mug as if it might hold her together. "I've thought about you more times than I can count," she said quietly. "When I heard that podcast, it felt like you were talking to me." I didn't know what to say. Every part of me screamed to stay guarded, but hearing her voice again brought back memories I thought I'd buried for good. She told me she regretted everything, that she'd left because she was scared. You were so open about your pain, and it reminded me of my own, she confessed, eyes glistening. I didn't know how to handle that, so I ran. There it was, the explanation I'd waited years to hear. And yet, it didn't feel like closure. It felt hollow, too late. We talked for an hour, maybe 2. She told me she'd tried dating again, but never felt that same safety she once had with me. I listened silently, watching her trace patterns on her cup, realizing I no longer needed her to understand me. When she finally looked up and whispered, "Do you think we could ever try again?" I felt something shift inside me, because for the first time, I wasn't the broken one in the conversation anymore. When Rachel asked if we could try again, the room went still. The clinking of cups, the low hum of chatter, it all faded until it was just her voice and the old ache she carried with it. My heart thudded against my ribs like it remembered something my mind was trying to forget. "I've changed," she said, eyes pleading. "I'm in therapy now. I finally understand how much I hurt you. I should have stayed." Part of me wanted to believe her. I wanted to imagine that maybe people could come back better, that love could get a second chance if both hearts were willing. For a few minutes, I even pictured it. Dinners at home, laughter again, no more ghosts between us. But then, she kept talking. She mentioned how she'd been following my success online, how she'd watched my interviews, seen the app's growth, read the comments. "You're doing so well," she said, smiling faintly. "You've become everything I always hoped you'd be." That sentence changed everything. It wasn't about me. It was about who I'd become after her. I could see it in her eyes. This wasn't love. It was nostalgia mixed with envy. "You didn't come back because you missed me," I said slowly. "You came back because now I look like the version of me you always wanted." Her face went pale. "That's not fair," she whispered. "Neither was walking out when I needed you most," I replied. She started to cry, her voice cracking as she said, "Please, just give me one more chance." I stood up, my chest tight but steady. "Rachel," I said quietly, "I'm not broken anymore. I just finally learned how to stand without you." I placed a few bills on the table and walked out. No shouting, no drama. Just peace. Outside, the air felt cold and new, and for the first time in my life I realized that closure doesn't always come with answers. Sometimes it comes when you stop needing them. I don't remember how far I walked that night, only that I couldn't stop. My hands were trembling, not from sadness this time, but from release. The city lights blurred in my eyes, and I laughed under my breath, realizing how many years I had spent chasing the wrong kind of peace. For the first time, I wasn't mourning her absence. I was protecting my own space. When I got home, I turned my phone off. There were already unread messages from Rachel, long paragraphs that began with, "I'm sorry," and ended with, "Please." I didn't read them. I didn't need to. The man who once begged for love had finally learned that silence could speak louder than any apology. I sat on my balcony, watching the traffic below, the sound of distant horns and wind filling the air. The city didn't care about my story. It just kept moving, and somehow that felt right. I took a deep breath and whispered to myself, "You did it. You finally let go." Over the next few weeks, I threw myself back into work and therapy. My therapist smiled when I told her about the meeting. "That wasn't a test of love," she said. "That was a test of growth. And you passed." Her words stayed with me. Because deep down, I realized Rachel wasn't my villain anymore. She was my mirror, the person who forced me to see how much of my worth I used to outsource to others. I deleted her number one morning without hesitation. No tears, no regret. Just a quiet sense of finality. That night I slept soundly for the first time in years. No dreams, no flashbacks, no ghosts. Just calm. And as strange as it sounds, walking away didn't feel like loss. It felt like coming home to myself. Months passed, and life began to take on a rhythm that didn't revolve around pain. The mornings were quieter, the nights lighter. I started going on morning runs again, the kind I used to avoid when everything felt too heavy to move. Somewhere between the miles and the music, I realized I wasn't trying to escape anything anymore. I was just living. Work flourished. The app grew beyond anything I imagined, expanding into mental health partnerships and outreach programs. I started mentoring young developers who'd been through trauma, teaching them how to turn pain into purpose. It wasn't about success anymore. It was about meaning, and that subtle difference changed everything. Then one afternoon, while volunteering at a local support group, I met Lena. She wasn't dazzling or dramatic like Rachel. She was calm, soft-spoken, grounded, the kind of person who didn't try to fix your silence but sat with you in it. We started talking more, sharing small details about our lives over coffee and coding sessions. One night, after everyone else had left, I told her about my past, about Rachel, about the night everything fell apart. I expected the usual discomfort or pity. Instead, she looked at me and said gently, "You don't have to apologize for surviving." Something about those words sank deep. She didn't see me as broken. She saw me as whole, just someone who had scars that told a story. For the first time, I didn't feel like I had to hide any part of myself to be loved. Love with her wasn't fireworks. It was sunrise. Slow, warm, steady. The kind that makes you forget the dark ever existed. And as we laughed that night, I realized this was what healing looked like, not erasing the past, but building a future that doesn't depend on forgetting it. But just when I thought the past had finally gone quiet, it found one last way to reach me. It was late one night when I saw her name again. Rachel. The email notification popped up as I was finishing a project, and for a moment, my chest tightened the way it used to. I hovered over the delete button, ready to erase it without reading. But curiosity, quiet, almost tender, made me click. The message was long. Pages of it, really. She started by apologizing for everything, for the words that haunted me, for the nights she turned away when I needed her most. She said she'd been in therapy for over a year now, and had finally begun to understand how much damage her fear had caused. Not just to me, but to herself. She wrote, "I didn't leave because you were broken. I left because you were brave enough to face your pain. I wasn't." I read that line over and over until the words blurred. She went on to say she still loved me, that she'd never stopped. That she often saw my face when she taught her own patients, because apparently she'd become a counselor now. The irony wasn't lost on me. Her final words were simple. "You deserved a love that could stay." I hope you found it. I sat there in silence for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't reply. I just stared at the screen, realizing how much life had shifted since the last time her voice broke me. There was no anger left, no ache, only gratitude, because she was right. I had found that love, not just in Lena, but in myself. As I closed the laptop, I whispered the truth I'd waited years to understand. I wasn't too broken to be loved. I was just too real for the wrong person. And with that, I finally let Rachel go. Not with bitterness, but with peace. The kind of peace that doesn't come from getting closure, but from becoming it.